Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, welcome to Killer Women. I'm Danielle Girard, your host, and my guest today is Tessa Wegert. Tessa is the author of the Shana Merchant series of mysteries, which includes Death in the Family, The Dead Season, and Dead Wind. A former freelance journalist, Tessa's work has appeared in Forbes, The Huffington Post, Adweek, and The Economist. Tessa grew up in Quebec and now lives with her husband and children in Connecticut. Her latest book, which we're going to talk about today, Dead Wind, released on March 1st. So, some descriptors for this series: a bone-chilling mystery that crackles with suspense, tense and twist-riddled, atmospheric, sophisticated thrillers. And I agree. Dead Wind was a fast, compelling read that kept the pages turning. Tessa manages to make every Shana book new and exciting and rife with tension that keeps you up way past your bedtime. So Tessa, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm excited to talk with you. This is great. I've been watching the podcast episodes, listening, and loving everything you're doing with this. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. It's so fun. I have to say, there's nothing I enjoy more than talking to other female writers. So this has been really fun. Plus, I'm getting to read all these, fabulous books. So let's talk about Shana. This is book 3 of the Shana Merchant series. And the series has been described as Louise Penny meets Ruth Ware in this small town mystery that bubbles with secrets and intrigue. So one of the things that makes the series so compelling for me is that the situations are woven so deeply into Shana's own sort of family history. Can you tell us a little bit about Dead Wind and this, what we expected, what we see in this story with Shana?
Yeah, I would love to. Absolutely. So with Dead Wind, at this point, Shana, it's a third book in the series, as you mentioned. At this point, Shana has been living in the Thousand Islands in upstate New York for about 8 months or so. And she's still kind of getting to know the community. She's still kind of getting settled there. She moved there from New York City, where she had worked with the NYPD as a detective, looking for a quieter, more peaceful life, looking for a job that didn't involve quite so much violent crime. But of course, as tends to be the case with these books, she didn't find it. There's actually plenty of crime going on in the town where she now lives. So with this story, it opens with the discovery of a body on one of the islands in the Thousand Islands that's actually on the Canadian side. So the St. Lawrence River, where the islands are located, some are in New York State and some are in Ontario. And this body is discovered on Wolfe Island in Ontario in the midst of a wind farm, right at the base of a wind turbine. And so Shana and her partner are called out there because there's some speculation that the victim might have some kind of ties to a town in her jurisdiction. So she and her partner, Tim, begin to investigate. And the big concern for Shana, aside from the fact that there's another homicide now in her area, right. Which keeps on happening, is that she's worried that there might be ties to Blake Bram. She's worried that he might be responsible for this murder. And Blake Bram is a serial killer that she has been kind of hunting for about almost 18 months at this point. He had abducted her while she was living in New York City, and she managed to escape that situation, but he is still at large. And there has been this cat and mouse game going on between them all this time. He has now kind of followed her, she believes, to the Thousand Islands, found her, tracked her down. And without giving too much away, they have a lot of personal history that makes her search for him and her hunt for him very complicated, because it's not just a case of a detective looking to apprehend this killer. There's a lot more complexity to that search and to that relationship. So that all comes into play in this story.
That is also true. And I think, everybody, I don't know what it is about us. Everybody loves a serial killer, but a serial killer that is so personally motivated by one specific victim. And especially a victim who got away. Like you said, I mean, he held her for, it was not a short period of time, right?
Yeah,
How long was she? Yeah,
about a week. Yeah.
A week. So the fact that she escaped him once probably, has upped the ante for him.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Shana, because actually the whole series, I sort of love to hear about, whether it's was it the plot itself. We probably should be talking about Death in the Family. Was it the plot itself that sort of got you going, or did you imagine Shana as a character and then this Blake Bram villain thing that would carry through some books? Was that how it started? Can you give us sort of, I think other authors and aspiring authors in particular love to hear sort of where the ideas come from. So what inspired you?
Yeah. So Death in the Family, the first book in the series, when I wrote that actually I intended for it to be a standalone, and then it just became a series. So I was lucky to get the chance to delve a lot deeper into that relationship and into Bram's history. Originally, a lot of that was wrapped up in the first book, but of course now I extended it over other books in the series, to keep people hooked and all. But yes. But right off the bat, I knew that I wanted her as an investigator to have a lot of stumbling blocks and a lot of challenges beyond just the fact that now she was in the Thousand Islands dealing with cases that were on islands, and I mean, there's a lot of challenges just involved with that, because it's not that easy to get a team of investigators out to a private island in a storm, which is the case in Death in the Family. Mm-hmm. So and this is a community she's not familiar with. She's still really trying to find her footing. And she's still dealing with a lot of PTSD after coming off of this abduction experience in New York. So all of that, I knew I wanted to throw all of those stumbling blocks at her, and create a detective who, a lot of fictional detectives have these quirks and foibles. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go kind of a little bit deeper into the psychology of how she would approach cases, and have there be these other personal experiences that really affected how she did her job and how she investigated these crimes. So that's where Blake Bram came in. And I knew right from the beginning, and again, without giving too much away, I knew right from the beginning who I wanted her to be who I wanted him to be to her, and what that relationship was going to be like.
Right.
Because in the very first book, you find out a little bit about him. Mm-hmm. He's part of her backstory, but you don't really learn his identity. Definitely. You really don't even learn what he wants from her. Why did he hold her captive for a week when the other women that he had abducted, he killed right away? I mean, she was his fourth kidnapping victim. She was his fourth victim, but she, for some reason that is not immediately revealed, survives. So that storyline has kind of been a thread, woven throughout all of the books in the series so far, and will continue to be. So that's how she was born. I mean, she was born of the idea for this villain that she had this really meaningful connection with, and very complicated.
A really bad guy. Yeah.
Yes.
It's so funny that you say that it started as a standalone. All three of my series have started as one book standalone, and then when you meet a character, I mean, and it's a mutual thing between. And obviously, the publishers really like a series, because when a reader loves the character, and you get those emails. I'm sure they're like, "When's the next Shana book?" And I get them too, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm writing that book. Those characters anymore, but we do get really addicted to somebody. And how fun that you had the Blake Bram thing there, because none of us, we would never have been satisfied if we didn't get these other books to know, what's really going on there and what's happening. And her damage, I love the sort of she's both a victim and an inspector, right? So she gets this, she now has this whole new layer of empathy and compassion. Right. And also sort of it's mortality. Like, I think of a lot of inspectors, they deal with such dark stuff that they have to sort of be really strong about death. They have to sort of feel a little invincible, and yet she knows, very firsthand that she's not invincible. So anyway,
Yeah, I try to really put myself in the head of, I mean, obviously I'm not a detective. I've never been a detective, but I researched this extensively before starting to write Death in the Family. And I was lucky to connect with the actual sheriff of Jefferson County, where Shana is based. Because these are all the books that are the towns that are featured in the books are all real life towns. And this woman, who is actually the first elected sheriff of New York State, and I have a sheriff character in the book whose professional experience is very similar to this, this real life sheriff.
Yes.
Who is a lovely person who has given me so much behind the scenes information about how crimes, but just the police procedure behind, especially in that area, how crimes are investigated there, and all of the unique, unique situations that exist there for investigators with the New York State Police. So she really informed the way that I approached not only the police procedure in all of these books, but also the characters as well. And I talked to her and I thought to myself, this is not, I mean, I'm sure there are detectives out there, investigators out there who are tough as nails, who have, show very little vulnerability. I didn't necessarily want to write that kind of, it was more interesting to me to write someone who had to overcome a lot of obstacles in her life, in her personal life,
right,
and who had this interesting family history, because all of that colors how she chooses to make the decisions that she does when she's doing her job and investigating a crime. And I think that's just, I hope readers agree. I just, as a reader myself, I always find that really interesting to try to, figure out what's really going on behind the scenes with this character beyond just what you're seeing at the crime scene.
And I think we see a little of ourselves in that. I mean, I think the vulnerability is what is the part where like, oh yeah, I would feel that too. I would be scared. And I love that these are, here we are with killer women, but I love that these are really badass women, right? They're very strong women, but that doesn't make them, impenetrable. They're also very, they're very nuanced characters. And I think that is really probably the most, male and female inspectors, just like everybody, are much more like that in real life than I think we see in some of the sort of, Rambo type movies. So I agree with you. I love the nuance. Now, can you tell us a little bit, since you're sort of new to this, a little bit new, this is your third book, so you're not new, and congratulations, because getting a book published, as we know, is a near impossible feat. And then getting the second book published, what do they say? I've heard this statistic, only 20% get a second book, and then only 6, the numbers get crazy smaller after that. So congratulations, that's amazing. Tell us a little bit, like, how long have you, I know you're a writer, you were a writer in your previous life, but when did you start writing fiction? Is this the first, are these the first books that you've written? And can you tell, aspiring authors sort of what the journey was like for you?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yes, I was a freelance journalist for a lot of years. So I've always been a writer, and I actually wrote fiction quite a bit when I was a child and into my teenage years. I wrote short stories and poems that I would submit to contests and various things. But I never had a story idea that I felt like I could parlay into an actual full-length novel until my kids were very young, like 9 months old and 2.5. And I just was really it was such a crazy, busy time.
Right.
And I was still doing some freelance writing on the side just to stay sane, I guess. But I was looking for some kind of creative outlet. And somehow I just kind of remembered how much I had enjoyed creative writing. And had an idea that I thought maybe I might be able to turn into a book. So I wrote a book, and that was the book that got me my agent within maybe a year or so. But that book has not been published. And it's so funny that these Shana books have turned into a series, because that book, I intended for it to be the first in a series. I wrote the second book in the series as well. I outlined and started to write the third book in the series. And none of those books went anywhere. So in retrospect, I was a little leery of writing writing a series, because I just didn't know if it was going to go anywhere. And on the other hand, though, I had all of those books that I wrote. So I wrote 4 books before I wrote Death in the Family, and all of those I now consider practice books. I mean, I really feel like if I hadn't written those books, I don't think I would have been able to pull off any of these books, because that was the experience that I needed. And I needed to make the mistakes and get feedback from my agent, my critique partners, and figure it all out before I was ready to have, something that really was polished enough to go to market. So I wrote Death in the Family as my first attempt at writing a classic mystery, and the other books had all had a mystery component to them too. But all of a sudden I just kind of realized that's really where my interests lie. And those were the types of books that I was reading the most as well. So I decided if I was going to write a mystery, I would make it be the most quintessential, dark and stormy night, like all sometimes somewhat cliched tropes. Like I wanted to incorporate all of that and have it be like an homage to the Agatha Christie books that I had loved, like And Then There Were None, this was kind of, and Death in the Family was inspired by that, with the cast of eccentric characters on the private island and all of that.
Closed room, or exactly.
Yeah, locked room, exactly.
Locked room.
So that's how it all came to be. And I mean, my only advice that I can offer really is to just stick with it, because it took me almost 10 years from writing that very first book to when Death in the Family was published. Yeah. But then after that, Death in the Family and the second book, The Dead Season, were both published in 2020. Wow. And now this third book is coming out, and I just submitted the fourth book in the series to my agent for review. So that will come out sometime next year. So exciting. So, I mean, it can feel like it's taking forever, and it can feel like a lot of fits and starts, but I really think sticking with it and using that time to kind of hone your craft, there's something to be said for that. I really, hats off to all of these debuts who managed to get there with their very first book that they write. I would be mortified now if I thought that first book that I wrote was the one that was out there in the world, honestly.
Well, I think that's right. I think everybody I know most authors have books buried in the backyard, as I always call them. I have 3. And the other thing I think you mentioned that I think is worth pointing out is it's not just that you were writing for 10 years, but that you finished a book, it didn't sell, and you moved on to another book, which I think people, you fall in love with. I think my first book, I fell in love with this book. And I fell in love with the idea, and there was a part of me that wanted to rewrite it until it was, until it was going to be published. But I think you learn more from, moving on into the next book. So I think that's another, and I think that's all incredible advice. And you can't quit, because if the only way you'll never get published is if you quit, right? Absolutely. That's pretty much a guarantee.
You need to be resilient, I think, as in this industry, right? And you need to understand too, and it took me a long time I was really, really precious with my words at the beginning, and I didn't want to make any changes. And I just remember I was so afraid that someone was going to steal this idea from me. I mean, nobody cared. It went out to 100 agents at the time or whatever. Nobody wanted this idea, but you just get so possessive
your
of
baby.
Exactly. And I mean, we do a lot together, but I think exactly the way you described it. I mean, being able to walk away from something and know that you have another book in you, you will find another story and you will flesh that out and make it work. I think you need to know that happens in publishing. Right. I mean, books will be rejected even once you're published. It can happen. So it's good to have that experience.
Yes, you have to be resilient, and you can cry and eat ice cream and drink wine. That's what I say. But then you got to, if you want to do it, you got to get up and do it again. So, so we're not giving anything away at the end of this book, and there is like a major, we can talk offline about that. But so without giving anything away, what is next for Shana?
Yeah, so that's a very tricky question to answer without giving anything away. But
well, you can just tell us. Can you give us a tiny hint about the plot of the next book?
I can. So the next book is again set in the Thousand Islands. It's set in the summer during what's called Pirate Days, which is a festival that actually takes place in this town of Alexandria Bay where Shana works, which is in celebration of this pirate named Bill Johnston, who was kind of like a renegade rebel who kind of played both sides in the US and Canada. And anyway, there's a lot of interesting history behind this pirate, but to honor him, the town, because he kind of hid out in that town for some time. This is like, a century and a half ago or whatever it was.
Right.
He has now this amazing 10-day celebration that happens every year kind of in his honor. And so that is the backdrop for the next book in the series. And Shana starts to investigate what is happening with a couple of crimes that occur during this festival that draws thousands of tourists to the town. So it's a little bit, again, like Death in the Family, an exploration of class and privilege, because there's a big divide between the locals who live in the town, who work in, blue collar jobs. They're in hospitality. It's a very touristy area. And these very wealthy families that come in the summer and have these private islands with multi-million-dollar homes, historic homes that have been, that were built like during the golden age, turn of the century, incredible. Some of them are actual legitimate castles. So that's always been so interesting to me, having visited this area for 20 years now, every single summer, that I wanted to explore that a little bit more. So that's a theme. I think it reads a little bit like a thriller too. It's a police procedural again, but there are some definite thriller qualities to it. I think hopefully people will feel it's pretty fast paced. So I'm excited about that. And I can't say much more about, I know exactly what you're wanting to ask.
I know, that's fair. That's fair. Well, that sounds amazing. I do want to go back and just point out, well, you talked about it earlier, but I did mention, I also love the fact that this is unusual, at least in my experience of reading, that she is dealing with, the Canadians versus the, America, and that, like you said, and one of the things that comes up in this book is that Shana, I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying that Shana doesn't know really how to drive a boat, and she needs, like, now that she's living in this place where there's all these, she grew up in Vermont, which, there's less need for a boat there, and then she's now having to learn how to do that. So that's another really interesting aspect. And you've clearly, obviously done a lot of research about the area and about, what's required to be in the police there, but it's got a really nice, fresh spin. So anybody, I feel like, who loves police procedures, which is so my jam, and strong women, and, and it had, all of these books have real thriller elements too, moments where you just kind of want to close your eyes and make the pages go faster so everything's going to be okay.
The setting plays I just was going to say real quick, because I wanted to compliment you on the atmosphere of your Badlands thriller series too, because, and those are the types of books that I absolutely love. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but setting really informs the story for me. Like, it's usually where I start, frankly, is with, I have this idea for, like with this book, Deadwind, I had been on a trip to Wolf Island where the crime scene takes place in this book. And I mean, it was going to be, 5 more years before this book came out. And I wasn't even writing the series at that point, but I took a bunch of pictures and videos while I was on this island with this wind farm, because I just was so struck by what a cool atmosphere it was.
Yes.
And I knew that I wanted it to be the setting at some point and have like a book with a strong sense of place and have that wind farm factor into it.
Yes.
That's something that I think, like, for me as a reader, the police procedurals that I love the most are the ones like that, and the thrillers that have like a really strong sense of place.
Yeah. And those wind turbines, I mean, I've been not that close, like never at the bottom of one, but I've certainly driven by them, and they are huge. And it's that so my analogy for that is those drilling, when I went to North Dakota for the research on the Badland thriller series, those big drills that look like,
so similar.
Dinosaurs. So anyway, it's that same, it's very unnatural,
it's unsettling, right? It almost feels like an alien, some kind of alien presence.
Right.
And especially, I mean, I think you probably will feel this way about the Badlands settings too, but when the landscape is so flat, and that's what Wolf Island is like so flat, then you even, this just the size of the turbines, and they just dwarf absolutely everything around them. I mean,
so dramatic.
It's unbelievable, right?
Yeah. I it's absolutely true. That's a really good point. And thank you for the compliment. That's very nice. But I am excited, and we have so much to look forward to. So I'm really excited. What do you have a title for the new book?
Not finalized yet.
Not
I
yet.
wish
Okay.
I did. I have a tentative title that I'm excited about, but I can't.
Yeah, I know.
Keep it. Who knows what will happen with it? It might be something totally different in 2 months. So
well, we can wait. We will hold ourselves, even though we want to know, of course. And we assume that the word dead will be in there, or death, or
something along those lines.
Yeah, you got that going. Well, it's really exciting, you guys. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Tessa, thank you for being here today. I feel like we could talk for like 4 more hours, but so we'll get you back when the next Shana book is out. I can't wait to read it.
I would love that.
Yeah, we'll do it. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Killer Women. I'm your host, Danielle Girard. And Tessa, tell us where to find you online really quickly.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm under Tessa Wegert, except for Facebook, which is Tessa Wegert Books. And actually, I think TikTok is Tessa Wegert Books too, but I'm not, we were just talking about this before, Danielle, I'm not super active on TikTok, but I am very active on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So yeah, I would love to connect with readers in any of those places.
And Wegert is Wegert, in case.
Yes, exactly.
In case you're listening and not watching. Okay, well, thank you again. And Killer Women is part of the Authors on the Air Global Network. We will see you next time.